Dr. Ilan Pappé is Professor of History at Exeter University in England. He is one of the world's leading historians of the Middle East. Among his publications are Britain and the Arab-Israeli Conflict, The Making of the Arab-Israeli Conflict, The Modern History of Palestine, One Land, Two Peoples, The Modern Middle East, and The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. He is the fulcrum of a group of historians and political scientists at the Cornwall campus of Exeter University working on 20th century ethnopolitics. The following is the speech delivered by Dr. Ilan Pappé at the opening ceremony of the Al Auda Convention.
I would like tonight to pay attention and focus on three aspects of what happened in 1948 and have a dialogue, conduct a dialogue with you, with the present. I would go back and forth from the past to the present on three different levels in order to find why the memory of what happened in 1948, why the history of what occurred in 1948 is so important for understanding what goes on today and is very crucial for understanding what should be done in the future. I will talk about the Zionist ideology as it appears in 1948. I will talk about the international community reaction to the events of 1948, and I will carefully say something about the Palestinian politics in 1948 and what can we learn from it today as well. Let me start with the Zionist ideology in 1948 and its relevance to what we see today. 1948 in many ways was a culmination of an ideological process which led to an articulation of a very clear formula, concept, which stated that there is no hope for a successful Zionist colonization of Palestine without the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. This concept was not born in one day. It was not always there at the very beginning of Zionism, although there were some fluid ideas about it. It was formulated clearly in the mid-1930s, and it was translated into a policy in 1948. We know now from the historical evidence exactly who were the people who formulated these ideas, who were the ones who put forward in a very clear language, with a very clear thinking, the plan to expel by force as many Palestinians as possible from as much of Palestine as possible. The importance of these names is that they are the heroes of Israel today. They all can be found in a pantheon of Israeli heroism. In order to understand what we are facing when we deal with the ethnic cleansing as a crime and the people who directly conceived it, directed it, commanded it, not only the people who executed it on the ground, but the people who really thought out all the details and had the terrible foresight that it can work. When we think about the people who are involved, when we mention the names, we have to understand that we are counting, that we are pointing out to the people who are at the heart of the Zionist consensus today. These are people that most Americans know by heart and revere them as great heroes of humanity, democracy, enlightenment, and modernity. And this is very important, and I think this is why it's so important to know who they were. And I will mention just one of them, because the others appear in my book. The founding father of modern Israel, David Ben-Gurion, is the arch criminal. He is the one who really led the whole operation from beginning to end, which ended with the destruction of more than 500 Palestinian villages, 11 towns, and the dispossession of so many people from their homeland. So the Zionist ideology is the motivating force, but you needed human beings, you needed people who would have, who would execute, who would translate the ideology into actions on the ground. And as it is important to fight an ideological mindset, it's also important to know who are the people who are captivated by this ideology, and to see if today we can identify who is behind the Israeli policies of ethnic cleansing that continue, rather than talk generally about Israel, Zionism, Jews, and so on. I think for the sake of building the future state that I think we all want to build, we should be very careful not to generalize and rather focus on the people. As much as we don't want to think everybody in the world that President Bush represents Americans wherever they are. So I think in this respect, it's very important to study 1948 in minute details, not just as a general story. It's to find out when, where, and who was involved in the crime, as good detectives should do in any kind of a crime. The ideological interpretation of Zionism that these leaders and generals had was that you need very particular circumstances in order to be able to commit a crime of this magnitude. It's not expelling one village. It's not destroying one town. It's not throwing out 100 people, 1,000 people from the houses. It is a decision to uproot a whole country. Very few politicians and generals in modern history, and even in ancient history, were that bold to believe that they are that powerful, that they can be that cruel to decide to take a whole country and depopulate it. We have to ask ourselves, how come Jews 3 years after the Holocaust could have been so callous, so determined in committing a crime of such a magnitude? What is so powerful about the ideology of Zionism? So I think the first lesson we learn by looking at the connection between Zionist ideology, the people who decided about the ethnic cleansing, and the operation on the ground, the first lesson I learned, at least from the history, which is relevant to today, is that we should focus our campaign on names and people and not be satisfied with vague concepts. We are not fighting something which we cannot see. Of course we are. I'm an anti-Zionist. So we can say we are fighting Zionism, we are fighting Israel, maybe we're fighting a certain group of Jews, and so on. But we should be much more specific of what we are doing. We are fighting people who are criminals, and we know their crimes, and we are going to be professionals about it, not just emotional about it. There was one moment of grace in Britain which I think showed us the way, when General Almog, who was the chief commander in the Gaza Strip and came to a shopping journey to Oxford Street in London, had to stay with the cleaners on the El Al aeroplane because a professional group of activists told the British authorities that they would ask for his arrest for war crimes, and he didn't want to risk it. So we should learn the nature of the crimes today as we know the nature of the crimes of yesteryears. We should know the names of the people involved in it, because we have very little chance of moving forward if we will adopt a very vague language about who is doing what to whom. We should know the name of the victims. We should know the name of the location where the crimes are being committed. We should appear, I think, to be very serious about it and to tell people that, like the Spanish judge who haunted, now he's dead, haunted Pinochet on every corner in Europe and tried to bring him to justice, we will haunt the people the moment we would know who they are. We want the names of the pilots. We want the names of the pilots who drop bombs on the Palestinians in Gaza Strip. We are not fighting the Israeli Air Force. We want the name of the pilots. We want the name of the, and nobody here knows, I can assure you, nobody here knows the names of the Israeli commander of the Air Force. But he is an arch criminal, and you don't know his name. You should know his name as much as you should know the names of his victims if you want to succeed politically. It's not enough to talk about Israelis committing crimes. It's like talking about America committing crime. It never moved anything, these vague languages. I think we should know that. It's easier to do it as an historian for 1948, I admit. But I think there is a model here that we should adopt for activity and action in the present and in the near future. The second point of view, the second aspect of 1948, which is relevant, is the international community's reaction to what happened in 1948. There was a conspiracy of silence. There were so many representatives of the international community on the ground. There were journalists, there were representatives of the United Nations, of the International Red Cross. There were people whose role and task and mission was to report to their relevant headquarters whether or not peace is being achieved in Palestine after the United Nations adopted the partition resolution on the 29th of November 1947. And they knew that instead of peace, from the 1st of February 1948, Jewish troops were going from one house to the other, from village to village, and were expelling by force people, massacring them when they resisted, and looting everything they had, from their material possessions to their cultural heritage, such as books, pictures, photographs, anything they had. Like a locust, they have eaten everything that they have found in their way. And this was seen by many, many people who were not Jews and were not Arabs, who were sent to Palestine to report back home. And they reported back home. We have the reports in the archives. They reported it's a very genuine report. I can say this as a professional historian. I think that they had a very clear picture of the magnitude of the crime that was committed against the people on the ground. But their headquarters, and it doesn't matter whether it was the editorial board of the New York Times, which had a very industrious journalist working for them at the time, who was he was embedded, as you would call it today, with the Jewish forces, and he reported very genuine reports about what was going on. So whether it was the editorial board of the New York Times, whether it was the headquarters of the International Cross in Geneva, or the United Nations Secretariat in New York at the time, they all had received genuine reports of what was going on. And they made a political decision not to publish these reports. They made a very conscious decision not to portray the reality on the ground in Palestine, because it was because there was only one way of depicting it: a crime and an ethnic cleansing. And it doesn't matter whether they would have used the term ethnic cleansing or not. However they would have chosen to represent or summarize the information that they had received from the ground, there was only one simple story to tell. The Jewish forces, later on the Israeli forces, were systematically expelling the Palestinians from their homes, fields, and businesses. Nobody in the Western world wanted to report that story. And when some historians a year or two later, mainly Palestinians or pro-Palestinians, were trying to say, all right, 2 years later, may we write an academic dissertation about it? May we tell a story about it, have a play about it? They were silenced too. It was suggested to them that so few years after the Holocaust, it's not a good idea to portray the Jews as murderers, expellers, looters, occupiers, and colonizers. This was a conscious decision by the political elites of the West to atone for what Europe did to the Jews in the Second World War. The price was very clear: the dispossession of Palestine. This was the price. It was a simple deal. Instead of facing the real victims, the real Jewish victims of the Nazi Holocaust, which was very difficult, it was much better to deal with the State of Israel instead. It's because the State of Israel wanted only one thing in return for the atonement of the political elites of the West and especially of Europe. It wanted the right to dispossess the Palestinians. And this right was granted, first by Europe and later by America, and it should be said it was also granted by the Soviet Union. For those of you who have a longing for the Soviet days, it was granted by the Soviet Union as well. In fact, the Soviet Union provided the arms with which the ethnic cleansing was committed. There was an interesting gap between the political and other political elite. There was an interesting gap between the Palestinian political elite and the behavior of the Palestinian people on the ground in 1948, which should teach us a lesson about what goes on today. One has to preface that and say, of course, that because of the events of 1936 to 1939, the Palestinians in many ways were quite leaderless in 1948. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to think about other chapters in Palestinian history when they were not leaderless. But in 1948, they were particularly leaderless. And the leaders who were mostly in exile, found it very difficult to have a united language and a united position, and more or less surrendered their leadership to the Arab League and its leaders. And in fact, if any Palestinians who lived in 1948 on the land of Palestine would have listened to the Palestinian politicians in 1948, worse would have happened. One has to say the truth. They had no idea what to do. They didn't know what to say to their people, even those who had some communication with their people, and they found it very difficult to formulate a position towards an event they did not anticipate. Of course, people now know what can happen. This is the big advantage that we have on 1948. We know what Zionism is all about. I think we understand that the strategy of all the governments of Israel, of all the political parties of Israel, regardless of their position in this charade of an Israeli rainbow of ideas, which doesn't really exist. And we still don't have a united Palestinian leadership. We don't have an address. I've been an activist for the Palestine cause, I think, for more than a quarter of a century, even before that. And if I have to answer questions, especially in initial meetings with people I want to recruit to the Palestine cause, and I would have to give them an address, Who should they write to? Phone or fax or text, so that they would know what the Palestinian leadership wants us to do? What does it expect us to do? Do you know the address? I don't know the address. We are in a dismal situation where when I go and call for boycott of Israel in London, the Palestinian embassy calls me to say that basically I'm right, but they're not sure this is the right direction. So I have to ask, what is the Palestinian leadership position on boycott? What is the Palestinian leadership position on the right of return? What is the Palestinian leadership position on the one-state solution? How far do they want us to go in the struggle against Zionism and Israel? Do they want us to support the peace process? Do they want us to support the next Annapolis conference? We have to solve these problems. We cannot be bystanders, whoever we are, Jews, Palestinians, Americans. If we are part of that impulse to change the oppressive reality in Palestine, we all have to say that we need a compass. We all have an individual compass, I'm sure. Some of us have spiritual compasses, which is good. We should all have them. But we need a mega compass for all of us, and we don't have it. The Palestinians didn't have it in 1948, and they still don't have it in 2008. So when we learn the history of 1948, we also should learn, and I don't have a formula for you, I don't have a magic formula for you how to do it, but I'm just saying we have to learn the need to find a compass. And some people say, and I think I understand where it comes from, let's put aside the debate between two states and one state. Let's put aside the debate between the Hamas and the Fatah. Let's put aside the debate between the inside and the outside. Let's put aside the debate of what kind of a state we want. If we will continue to put all these debates outside, we will be outside as well, eventually. I think this is part of the struggle. Not to defeat each other if we don't agree about something, but to find the golden mean, how to work together on this. But not to hide these things. To find a compass for the next generation of the people who would form the next Solidarity Committee with Palestine. If something is to be learned from the ANC struggle and the anti-apartheid movement in Europe and in America, was the clear orientation it has received from the ANC. And it was very, very important. And I say this because I really, really, really believe that a clear orientation and clear answers to these questions which we keep saying we'll put aside because we have to move forward. A real answers to these questions will also help us to realize our dream of return, of ending the Zionist regime, of creating a new reality in Palestine for all of us. I really believe in it because I think that it's not enough, and as important it is, to feel that eventually evil projects comes to an end, which is true. But for the sake of the people of Gaza, for the sake of the people in Jenin, we don't have the luxury of waiting for this historical lesson to happen just by itself. For their sake, we should find the energy and the power to overcome the internal strifes, to find a direction that would suit all of us, even if it will take a whole year to discuss it, and to tell ourselves that we have the kind of leadership we all want and we all need in order to change the reality for all of us. Thank you very much.
Western media at all that there was about 20 million Muslims who protested and demonstrated against ISIS and were making clear that ISIS has nothing to do with genuine Islam. We created that. And again, I say that's not an accident. The creation of ISIS is not an accident. We know that Al-Qaeda is the CIA database. That was not an accident. These are the Frankensteins that Western intelligence agencies and Mossad create in order to justify our policies in the region, which are basically to destroy that entire region, to balkanize that region so that ultimately Israel can expand. And the American government is bought and paid for by Israel. And it couldn't be more obvious. Netanyahu's 3 visits to the U.S. Congress, where these sycophants, traitors in the U.S. Congress, sit there and give him 29 standing ovations, tells you everything about who owns the U.S. Congress, which is nothing but a den of...
They talk about a Jewish plot.
Everywhere you look, you find a Zionist agent.
A conspiracy by Israeli intelligence.
في اللحظات نفسها.
Or by Zionist moles in the Bush administration, allegedly calling the shots in the Middle East. Websites, magazines, documentaries, radio programs, dozens of them disputing the facts that Al-Qaeda was behind the 9/11 attacks.
It was done by a group of Zionists.
Investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. Investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 9/11 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and or explosive ordnance units.
What about this question of advanced knowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11? How clear are investigators that some Israeli agents may have known something?
Well, it's very explosive information, obviously, and there's a great deal of evidence that they say they have collected. When they put it all together, a bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote.
He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
This is the only way. Without this clarity of purpose, there will be no world order.
When Mr. Ahmadinejad suggested that the 9/11 attacks were staged by America to save Israel, the US delegation walked out of the meeting in New York rather than wait for details of the Iranian leader's conspiracy theory. For the record, Mr. Ahmadinejad espoused the theory that segments within the US government orchestrated the terror attacks on September the 11th, 2001 to reverse the declining American economy and its grip on the Middle East in order to save the Zionist regime. He went on to claim that the majority of the American people, as well as most nations and politicians around the world, agree with this version of events. The bizarre speech won a smattering of applause from the chamber, some of it bemused, much of it from the Iranian corner, but the end of the speech at least meant that the Americans felt they could return to the room.
The Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv has reported Israel's former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly said the September 11th attacks have been good for Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, we're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq. Netanyahu then reportedly said these events, quote, swung American public opinion in our favor.
But there is such a concept in Jewish law as any population, and under very, very specific circumstances, according to various rabbinic opinions, it would be seemingly permissible to kill children.
חיות, דיסקאברי. כל רמאללה זה ג'ונגל, יש שם קופים, כלבים, גורילות. הבעיה שהחיות עכשיו סגורות שם, הם לא יצאו. מה? לא, אנחנו בני אדם, הם חיות. להם אין צלם אנוש, לנו יש.
This is the story of the founders of Hollywood. The story of the idea that became their America and ours. It was largely the product of 6 movie studios, established in the 1920s and run for over 30 years by a group of Jewish immigrants. They had strikingly similar backgrounds.
All of these men who founded Hollywood were born within a 500-mile radius of one another. And all of them wound up roughly within 15 miles of one another in Los Angeles. One could say that the American dream was really born in Eastern Europe.
Often the first thing to go was the Jewish name. The Hollywood Jews were obsessed with erasing anything Jewish in their films, their lives, and the lives of their stars. Sofia Kosso became Sylvia Sidney. Isser Danielovich Dembski became Kirk Douglas. Leo Jacobi became Lee J. Cobb. Shirley Shrift became Shelley Winters. Bernard Schwartz became Tony Curtis. David Kaminsky became Danny Kaye. Edward Iscovitz became Eddie Cantor.
Superman was invented by two Jewish kids in the late 1930s. Superman is discovered like Moses in the bulrushes. He's an immigrant from another planet who comes to Earth. He has his identity as a mild-mannered intellectual, but really underneath, he's the man of steel. I think that's a very suggestive Jewish fantasy. It's almost as if he's passing all the time.
While the Jew felt like an alien in America, Superman was a real alien.
This looks like a job for Superman.
Only Jews could have created a story based on the premise that all one needs is a Gentile demeanor to hide in plain sight.
Try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way, what I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me. Looking for change, looking for pain. Pulling a mob, pushing a train. I'll never stop, stick to a lane. Pick up the pieces and go rearrange. I'll be the best above all the rest, put me to the test and expect nothing less. You check as I'm chess, what's happening next? Yeah. He got the venom, a tangible weapon, no coming in second. This life is a lesson. He got a new engine from pain, it's a blessing. New focus, no guessing, just bold and obsession. All in his possession, you got their attention. I'll leave an impression and take your redemption. Just kill, no discretion, your mind is a weapon. 11-11, it's time for progression. You could try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way, what I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me. People like sheep move feet, hurt it easy. You don't wanna be fast asleep when they scheming. Better stand tall, ready for a fight, believe me. When they try the chains, you can say no, free me. So he's been looking for somebody who could save him, instead of searching inside for what they gave him. A strong will, strong mind causes mayhem. We could change the world, change times, rearrange them. Staying on pace, running the race. Life is a chase, I don't want a place, I wanna be first. Work till it hurts, dehydrated thirst till I'm in a hearse. High ambitions in the right mind can take you so far. It's like you lived a few lifetimes. Take off from a break off from the weak minds. They can stay soft. You can change lives. You create thoughts. Never waste time. You got one shot. You got one life. Better pop off. What do you like? Make a dream job. No 9-5. No mean boss. Just my life and free thoughts. You could try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way. What I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me. People like sheep move feet, hurt it easy. You don't wanna be fast asleep when they scheming. Better stand tall, ready for a fight, believe me. When they try the chains, you can say no, free me.